On testing, when you look at the experience in China, you look at the experience in South Korea, what changed the trajectory of the incline of the number of cases? It was a tremendous amount of testing and investigation. China, 200,000 tests per day. South Korea, 15,000 tests per day. They were so aggressive on testing that they actually identified the people who tested positive, isolated them, and then ran down the track of who those people may have contacted. Massive testing. This country, we've done 5,000 tests to date, according to the Secretary of Health and Human Services. So our testing capacity is nowhere near what it needs to be. Now, there'll be a retrospective one day. What happened? Why? You saw China November, December last year. You saw the case coming. Why did it take so long for this country to get a testing protocol done? That will be for another day. I'm a governor. I'm concerned about today. I'm concerned about tomorrow. So New York State is going to take matters into its own hand. We're going to start contracting with private labs in the state to increase our testing capacity. Remember again the chronology. We started several weeks ago. CDC said they would do all the tests and they would send them to Atlanta. We said that was too little, too late. They allowed the state laboratory to do testing. That capacity was several hundred. We said that's too little, too late. We have great labs in this state. Why the federal government wouldn't avail itself of the labs, why they wouldn't have had protocols and tests ready. So we are going to contract directly with the private labs in this state. There are about 200 labs in this state. The Department of Health routinely works with about 28 labs, which are expert in this kind of testing and virology, and where the Department of Health has a pre-existing relationship with these labs, where they're confident of the lab's work product, et cetera. We had a call with the 28 labs today. We informed them that they should get up, get running, and start moving forward with testing. There's still some complexity that the FDA needs to sign off on the actual protocols of some of these tests, and that is still complicating the situation, but this will greatly increase our testing capacity as we get these 28 labs up and running. We had them on the telephone today. We had the communication today, and we're starting the mobilization of those 28 labs, but that'll make a big difference. But frankly, we're not in a position where we can rely on the CDC or the FDA to manage this testing protocol. So we'll be moving forward with that. Second track, reduce density. Why? Because if somebody is infected, you don't want them to infect more people. That's what we're doing in New Rochelle. You have that intense cluster. You know you have an intense cluster. Stop large gatherings where you have a large cluster of people who are infected. It's called common sense. And that's what we announced with New Rochelle. We're also announcing that CUNY and SUNY, starting March 19th, will move to a distance learning model. And both systems will be doing that. CUNY will help reduce the density in New York City. SUNY will help reduce the density in downstate New York. That's SUNY Purchase, it's Stony Brook, it's Westbury, et cetera. Downstate is where we have the highest density of cases now. So SUNY and CUNY closing March 19th, thereabouts. There are some different campuses. There may be some variability, but that will be a way to reduce density, and that is a good thing. I've also spoken today with hundreds of business leaders, primarily in New York City. I've asked them voluntarily to help reduce the density. There are a number of ways they can do this, different work shifts. Some people work early, some people work late, different teams. One team works 1 week, the other team works the other week. But again, ways to reduce density in the city. Telecommuting, working from home. All the experts say social distancing. You should be more than 6 feet from someone. Try walking down a New York City sidewalk and be 6 feet from people. It would be virtually impossible. So reducing density, how do you do that? Ask the businesses to cooperate. We're also going to be making a decision on the St. Patrick's Day Parade. We'll make that decision later on. I want to speak with a few more people, but I've been speaking with health experts, Dr. Fauci, who I believe is one of the best in the nation, who I've spoken to a number of times. He testified today, and this is his strong recommendation. Just reduce large gatherings. Why would you risk bringing thousands of people together, knowing that this is a virus that easily communicates? Dr. Fauci was talking about sports events, et cetera, but St. Patrick's Day is one of the great convenings, right, of a large number of people. So we'll be making that decision today. But if you listen to the experts, they would say you should not be having a St. Patrick's Day convening at this time, which I believe makes sense. We said if we're asking people to be quarantined, we are asking the legislature to pass a bill that says people will be paid by their employer if they're on quarantine. Lead by example. New York State will pay any person who is quarantined who is an employee of New York State. So if you're on mandatory quarantine or on what we call precautionary quarantine, you'll be paid if you're a state employee. Public transit, we've asked them statewide to double the cleaning protocol. There's conflicting information on how long the virus lives on a hard surface, plastic or stainless steel. It was at first a couple of hours, then some people said up to 12 hours, some people now say up to 24 hours, some people say maybe a little longer than 24 hours. We want to double the cleaning protocol just to make sure New Yorkers are confident. There was a situation in White Plains where an attorney who practiced at Westchester County Courthouse in the White Plains Courthouse tested positive. 6 courtrooms are closed for cleaning, and employees who had contact with that attorney will be on precautionary quarantine, and anyone who needs a test we will do. The overall number of cases in Westchester, you see again 13 new cases. That is probably the single most troubling point in the state right now. 48, 12 new ones in New York City, 28 Nassau, 212 statewide. This number, as I have said from day one, will continue to grow every day. The more tests we get, the more positives we will get. That's exactly what we are seeking. These are not random survey tests. This is not a random sample. We don't have people who are random sampling the universe to find out what the infection rate is. This is when we find the person who is positive, asking them who they came in contact with, and then testing that chain. That's primarily where these tests come from. And we're looking for the positive. So that is actually good news because it says we're successfully tracking the chain. These numbers will continue to go up dramatically. The more tests we do, the more these numbers will increase. These numbers do not reflect anyone's belief of what percent of the population is infected. My theory, talking to everyone else, having no medical experience whatsoever, is the coronavirus was in this country before people acknowledged, and that it is much more widespread than people acknowledge. My guess is when we go back and we look at this, we will find that there were many people who had coronavirus where it resolved and nobody even knew about it. We're looking at a test that would test for antibodies that the body produces to fight the coronavirus to prove out this point. If a person has antibodies that were produced to fight the coronavirus, it'll show that they actually had the coronavirus at an earlier time, resolved, and moved on. But that's a test that the Department of Health is working on. You see it goes New York and Washington State, number 1 and number 2, depends on the number of cases that day. Again, to the extent these tests are representative of anything. Death rate in Washington State much higher because it was of a vulnerable population. It was a nursing home. And that is the vulnerable population in a congregate setting. That is the most dangerous situation posed by this virus. Senior citizens, people with a compromised immune system, people with an underlying illness in a congregate facility. Third point is communication. Communication is making sure people have the facts, the right information, because the facts here do not justify the amount of fear. I understand it's a virus. I understand it sounds like a bad science fiction movie. This is not the Ebola virus. We've dealt with that. That was a much more dangerous, frightening virus. The facts here actually reduce the anxiety. We have 212 cases in the state of New York. 32 are hospitalized. Well, how about everyone else? They're home. They're recovering at home. Or they have recovered. But only 32 out of the 212 require hospitalization. And to me, what is the most definitive factual information is the Johns Hopkins study. Let's go back and track every case of coronavirus since we first heard about it. Let's go back to China to the first case and track all the cases and find out what happens. 121,000 cases. From the beginning, 4,000 deaths. 66,000 people recovered, 50,000 pending cases. 4,000 deaths are terrible. Yes, no doubt. How many people died in the United States from the flu last year? Roughly 80,000 from the flu. So, again, perspective. Questions, comments?
On SUNY, does this mean that students who are living in dormitories will be sent home, or will they just be learning online for the remainder of the semester in their homes?
Beth?
We are developing plans as we speak in consultation with SUNY and CUNY to make sure that they can deliver all of these classes online. There may be certain applications where in-person instruction is still required, like lab settings. So the campuses are not themselves going to be closed, but the goal is to reduce the congregation of multiple students. So staggered class times, maybe breaking up class into smaller units, things of that nature.
For the rest of the semester, just to be
Yes.
clear? Okay.
Yes.
How many tests is the state running currently? Daily?
Can't give you an exact number, but hundreds and hundreds of tests.
Like between, can we get a range there?
Way over 500 tests.
Way over 500. Are you up to the 1,000 per day goal?
Let
that
me
you
look
set?
for the exact number for you.
Okay.
What did the federal government say when you said you were going to go, New York was going to go its own route and start contracting with these private labs?
This has been an ongoing conversation from day one, right? From when they announced, well, all the tests have to be done at CDC. And then there was a tremendous delay, and CDC was a terrible bottleneck. CDC, their main lab was in Atlanta, so all the tests were supposed to go to CDC. They were going to send them down to Atlanta, then they were going to come back. We had a tremendous pent-up demand for tests, and that was just too restrictive. We voiced our consternation about that. Good word, consternation. I've voiced my consternation to you on occasion, so you understand what I mean by consternation. They then went to phase 2. Okay, the state labs can test. Yeah, but that got us a few hundred. That wasn't enough. And then this is the third phase where we can't just wait anymore. It's compounding the problem. And frankly, they can't put us in this situation because we're not able to do our job and our constitutional duty, which is to protect the public health. So we said we want to authorize the private labs in our state, and that we were going forward with doing that, and they assented.
I'm sorry to be kind of repetitive here, but can we be very clear on
Then don't be. If you're sorry, if you don't want to be repetitive, then don't be.
I rescind my apology. I'm not sorry.
Oh, so you're not sorry. So you're affirmatively repetitive.
I'm affirmatively
Aggressively repetitive. Go ahead.
Sure. So soon, this is not a ban on in-person classes for SUNY. This is taking steps to restrict the number of people in classes. Can we?
Well, ban is nobody said ban. Ban is like a harsh word. We want to reduce density. The SUNY CUNY campuses will, now they're individual campuses, they have different programs, but they will be releasing students to the best of their ability starting March 19th. If students have hardships where they have nowhere to go and they're dorm students, then I'm sure an individual campus would take that into consideration. There'll be some situations where they have programs that must happen on site. They're doing a lab or something like that. But those are the exceptions, and those will be exceptions to avoid hardships. Otherwise, they'll be releasing for the rest of the semester to do distance learning, et cetera.
So, follow-ups on that. One would be, there's some students who are on break now that might come back on March 15th, for example, which would just be a few days before that. What happens in those situations? And also, what happens with the athletic teams, the athletic events that are supposed to be held on campus for the rest of the semester?
Yeah, the different schools have different breaks at different times. Your scenario, I don't believe the school would say come back for 2 days and then we're going to release you. So different schools can calibrate it differently. Sports teams, I don't know. We'll get you the answer though.
So if there are students,
Were you on a sports team at SUNY? I'm just curious.
Governor, so if you're on a SUNY campus now as a student, like living in a dorm, you're going to be sent home on March 19th?
The campuses on March 19th would be closing for the rest of the semester. If there's a hardship where you're in a dorm and you have no place to go, I'm sure that would be taken into consideration. And
That said, they're not going to close.
The dorms may stay open to accommodate particular student situations. What we are trying to do in coordination with SUNY and CUNY is to reduce the congregation of large numbers of people in classroom settings, so students will be able to return home if that's what they want to do and continue their studies at a distance, either through online or other mechanisms. But we don't expect that what we're going to do on March 19th is say everyone must find a new place to be.
they're not evicting, excuse me a second, they're not evicting anyone, right? They're not closing the dorm and kicking you out. They are going to distance learning. You can go home, do it by distance, go wherever you want to go, do it by distance. If you have nowhere to go, and that is a situation, then SUNY will work it out that you can stay in the dorm.
When it comes to paid sick leave specifically to the individuals who are private sector, you mentioned the public and taking that step forward, what do you imagine those provisions specifically for coronavirus to be in the legislation for paid sick leave? How many days would it be?
The coronavirus parameters. That's what they are.
So 14 days for quarantine?
It's a 14-day quarantine, yeah.
Some of the 28 labs that you had talked to today, do they need federal approval to do automated testing, or is this still manual testing?
Most of them do the manual testing. You don't have automated testing protocols available or authorized by the FDA. That's why I said it's a little complex. We can authorize the lab, but there's some of the protocols we can't authorize. But we want to move to the automated protocols. A couple of labs do have the approvals, right, Doctor?
Yes, it's semi-automated, sort of semi-automated.
You have manual, semi-automated, and then automated. Some labs have approval for semi-automated. Do any labs have approval for automated, Northwell?
We'll work on that.
No.
So the 28 that you've spoken to are going to be doing manual.
Manual or semi-automated.
I don't think there's going to be more testing. Could you go over what are the guidelines for when people should be tested? Is there going to be more opportunity, or should it still be if your doctor thinks you should be tested?
No, the protocols are the same as they are. You cannot manage, you can't open a front door when you don't have the capacity to handle the tests, right? So we established a prioritization, if you will, of the testing. And that same prioritization protocol still applies. When and if we get additional capacity, then we can open up that protocol wider.
When it comes to Saratoga, SUNY too, is it all the campuses? And would it include graduations?
Graduations, I don't know. All the campuses, yes. Graduations, did we discuss?
We spoke to SUNY leadership just before this, and they're talking that through as we speak. But the expectation is that, yes, a large number of them will be not happening in person.
Is anybody else at the Port Authority tested positive?
No.
when it comes to Saratoga County and some of the other counties that have low numbers at this point, is there additional testing happening that's come back negative? I know we're not getting exact numbers for the number of tests, but we spoke to someone yesterday who said, hey, I had direct contact with this pharmacist, I have symptoms, I was told no test, and that DOH said there's only 1,500 tests in the state. So again, that's someone talking, but are other tests being run in these low areas right now, or are they just not priority?
Yeah, no, you get the same protocol applies across the state. It doesn't make a difference if you have a high density, low density. It's the same protocol all across the state. And yes, we run tests that come back negative. You don't hear about them, but they come back negative.
Governor, could you speak to why it's so difficult to find out exactly how long the virus can survive on hard surfaces?
You have different opinions from different tests, literally. So, you have a number of different scientific organizations that do tests. Some people say we did a test and the virus lived for 2.5 days on stainless steel. We did a test and the virus lived for 2.5 days on plastic. Some people say that's the aberration. Normally, the virus only lives for a couple of hours on stainless steel. So it's who do you want to believe at this point? Right, you want to answer that? Go ahead.
Sure. Also, temperature, humidity. There are many different environmental factors that come in to how long this virus or any virus, or for that matter, any bacteria will live on a surface.
Governor, on the New York City St. Patrick's Day Parade, what authority do you have?
I'm sorry, Bernadette Hogan.
Governor, what point of authority do you
I knew
have?
that one was going to strike home.
Yeah, so what kind of authority do you
Oi.
on March 17th to close down
Yes.
the New York City St. Patrick's
Well, I'm
Day parade.
authorized, by St. Patrick. That's who? Oh, yes, I have the highest authorization, sure. Oh, yes, it's in the job description. You got to take a look. It could be, maybe. Or maybe I just ask the Archbishop, what do you think? Too late, too late. I'm going to be speaking to the parade organizers and the people who are involved and see what they say.
Do you have the ability to close down other counties? Like Onondaga County right now has said that they're going to continue their parade. What about other cities
Well,
as
look,
well?
you have to look at the situation in that locality because you do have very different situations across the state. If you have a very low density of low density of caseload, then, you can argue, why should you close it down? You have just a few cases. New York City, you have a fairly high density of cases. You have a cluster of cases, and it's a huge parade. It is not, I love the St. Patrick's Day parade, just so you understand, Bernadette Hogan.
Your family's half.
Half, that's right.
Yeah. What do they think about it?
I haven't told them yet.
On nursing homes, have you gotten any closer to the point where you think that they're going to be ending visitation? And any idea how long, Governor and Doctor, the changes might be at nursing homes as far as limiting visitation?
I think we have had some nursing homes where we've limited and closed visitation. We're going to continue to move forward. We're monitoring all the nursing homes, and as I mentioned the other day, also putting out posters and other forms of information for people who want to visit.
Similar question on authority, the containment area in New Rochelle. Are you using your authority through the law that was passed last week? Is there something else in public health law? What legal authority do you have?
We haven't, there hasn't been a mandatory, everything that we have done to date has been basically by agreement. I don't think we've had any situation where there hasn't been concurrence. So it hasn't become a question of legal authority.
So, but by that method, a church could hold a service this weekend, and face no consequences?
Well, I don't know about consequences for a church, right? It's beyond my pay grade. But there hasn't been any situation where it went to the question of legality.
Governor, can you comment on how much you expect the capacity for testing to grow with these 28 labs? I mean, how many more tests are you going to be able to run? And then how does the new antibody test, how are those going to be rolled out, and how many people will be able to get those?
Yeah, I'll let the doctor speak about the antibody. The problem with the testing capacity is we're not in control of the entire situation. So we have 28 labs that we have existing relationships with. They do virology. They're labs that the state health department believes are highly qualified, but they then need protocols approved by the FDA and tests approved by the FDA. So it's not like the state can just say, okay, you're a lab, here's the protocol, here's the agents, here's the assay, go. Because you always get this overlap with the federal government. It's primarily a federally regulated system through the FDA. So that's why it's hard to manage from the state side, because we don't really manage it. The antibody test, you want to speak to that?
Sure. Thank you, Governor. So the antibody test would be a way to measure to see if somebody actually had been exposed to coronavirus and didn't even know it, was sick, and got better. And that's in development. We need to actually obtain individuals who have had symptoms or are positive for coronavirus, and then look in their blood to see if they've developed the antibodies, and then it would be a matter of scaling that up. So we're in the first part of this, and we'll move forward on. I couldn't hear you,
Do you
sorry.
have a timeline for when that will be?
Not yet, but we can get back to you.
The Department of Health has issued regulations to the nursing homes. Are we going to see similar sort of guidelines for adult daycare centers or senior congregate facilities?
I think that we are doing this not only with the nursing homes, but also with the adult care facilities as well. And we have to tailor it for each individual facility, depending on how many people are there, the structure of how it's designed.
Is there going to be some sort of guidelines similar to the nursing home
Well, we're working on guidelines for the nursing homes and also for those facilities, yes.
Are the 28 labs that you're contracting with, are they FDA approved at this point? Are they ready to go, or?
No, they are state approved. Some of them have protocols and tests that are FDA approved. Some of them have protocols and tests that are not approved by the FDA, and they're waiting for FDA approval.
So how much will that increase capacity?
We don't know yet. We don't
There's an
know. That's what we're just trying to, we just got off the telephone with them.
There's an election coming up, Governor, for Queensborough president on March 24th, and of course, April 28th is the primary here in New York State. Have you considered any action to either expand absentee voting or change the way people vote?
No, not at this time.
Would you slash the amount of signatures that petitioners need to get?
We've had no discussion about that at this
What
time.
about just generally gathering people in place? We're talking about you don't want 200 kids in a lecture hall, you don't want 200 people in a church or a synagogue on a Sunday, but we've got the NCAA tournament coming up. You don't want
Dr.
St.
Fauci.
Patrick's, maybe you want, but San Francisco is banning everything. Washington's banning anything over 1,000.
Yeah, that is exactly the question. St. Patrick's is obviously the extraordinary outlier, right, for concentration and density. But that was what Dr. Fauci was talking about today. He was talking about sports events, et cetera. And look, you don't want to shut down society, right, because that's massively disruptive to the economy, to life, et cetera. But your main concern here is the public health crisis, and it's balancing the two.
Does that include also community campuses that are affiliated?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Pardon my Irish brogue, I know it was terrible. Must have been offensive to your ears, Bernadette. Not at this time. We are going to stagger the upstairs.